Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast, Thursday, January 23rd edition of the RTI Press Pass. I'm your host, Jack Foster, back this week after taking last week off. Got my guys, Ryan Schumpert and Ric Butler, here with me today, as always. Ryan, how we doing?
I'm doing well. Probably not quite as well as you're doing. I imagine I know you're still doing a lot of NFL stuff, but to have the college football season in the rear view. I know it's very fun when you're going through it, but I'm sure very, very hectic as well. And a little bit off your plate now that we got the national championship game in the rear view.
Yeah, no doubt. I was in Atlanta last weekend. It's a lot of fun, but like Ryan said, it is a lot of work. And now you can breathe. I mean, the cadence of all our shows, we're talking like SVP goes from twice to once. Greg goes from 4 to 2. Like Mina's going to go to 1 here soon. It's going to be cut in half, and just in time for Tennessee baseball season, as it works beautifully with my schedule. And I couldn't be more thrilled. 22 days away, by the way. Tony Vitello days away.
Tony Vitello days.
First pitch down there over at LNS. Rick, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Jack. It's good to have you back on the show here. We certainly missed you last week, like Ryan alluded to. Obviously, hope you had fun in Atlanta. I mean, what is that, like the third, fourth national championship that you've been to in your career? I'm guessing 3?
Yeah, 3, the last 3. And it was...
How would you rank them? How would you rank them?
So as far as game goes, this one was the best, right? Like, you could just tell Michigan was going to be too much for Washington. Of course, Georgia TCU, it's arguably the worst championship game of all time.
Yeah.
But, like, as far as host site and where you're at, LA's the best, And I will say Atlanta was much better than I expected as far as having fun in the city, Mercedes-Benz, all that stuff. Houston's definitely third in that category. Not that Houston was terrible or anything. I still enjoyed Houston, but Atlanta was
Houston's
fun.
Gross.
But you just can't match LA. Like the next 2 years, I believe, are Miami and Vegas. So I'm sure the order will be a little different after these.
That might match LA. That might match.
Yeah, I think it might. And Rick, you and I went to Miami a couple of years ago, and that's still one of my favorite places I've been to is South Beach. So it was a lot of fun for the Orange Bowl then. But yeah, it certainly was a good time in Atlanta, and the game delivered too in the end.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's kind of.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rick. No, you got it.
Well, I was just saying, when we went to Miami, Jack and I found this one sort of Chipotle-style restaurant that was phenomenal. We had a good time exploring the place. I know Jack went to the beach. We had a good time in Miami. So hopefully you'll be able to make it back next year. Hopefully Ryan and I will be able to make it there next year or whenever that is, just simply by covering our own team. But glad that happened, and hopefully you get a return trip here sometime soon.
Yeah, I can't say I'm holding my breath too much for that. It's funny though. I was thinking I wasn't thinking about that trip, but where I was during that trip was in Oxford, Mississippi for Tennessee basketball's SEC opener. And I was thinking about that game last night as I watched Ole Miss just absolutely blow it to A&M last night. Three games in the SEC where the South Carolina-Florida game where Florida won, and then the Ole Miss A&M game where A&M won. Both teams scored a basket in the last 15 seconds, and it was their first lead of the game, and they won. And then the Georgia-Arkansas game wasn't quite that dramatic, but Georgia was up by, I think, as much as 17 in the second half before blowing it. All-time bad beat. You guys, it is unbelievable. This Georgia-Arkansas game.
Yeah, Arkansas.
I loved it.
Too. Yeah,
I loved it.
Yeah.
For anyone who didn't see into this game, Arkansas was shooting 2 free throws up by 1. No, I take that back. 2 free throws. Tied.
No. It was
tied.
Yeah.
It was tied. 2 free throws tied. I had Georgia plus 3.
Yeah.
Again, Georgia was up by 17 in the second half of this game. Makes the first free throw. Arkansas, gets out of there. They abort the free. They have nobody. So there's the shooter and 4 Georgia players in the free throw.
Yeah, they're playing
setup.
3-man deep.
The Arkansas player bricks the free throw and somehow gets the rebound. There's 4 people there. Nobody boxes him out. He gets the rebound with 2 seconds left in the game, by the way, and shoots the layup as time expires to win by 3. And so push. So I didn't end up losing, but it felt worse than a loss.
It was one of those free throws, though. It was one of those free throws where it was just, it was, you say, how did it happen? And you're right. You're sitting there going, how did one guy beat 4 guys right there on the baseline? But it was just that perfect set of circumstances where he misses short. It hit front iron, bounced basically right back to him in the lane. He took 2 steps up, caught the ball, and then went back up with it. There's not many other ways that ball could have bounced more perfectly back towards him going to the basket.
I mean, that's right, but I could not care less. Like if one if one of the 4 players had attempted to go for the ball, they would have gotten the rebound.
Right. No, I'm just adding context to the story.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
So Ryan, you said you had 3. I saw on social media a ton of people had 2. So
I think it closed. It closed at 2. I had gotten it earlier.
I saw 2 as well.
I would imagine that makes bad beats because I mean, close spread, almost a pick 'em. So you typically don't see those on the segment, but that's just all time brutal. And Ryan, you were referencing those games last night. Peter Burns had this tweet blew up last night. Georgia, Ole Miss, and South Carolina all led for 119 minutes and 14 seconds of 120 minutes of game time. They went 0-3.
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
46 seconds across 3 teams that they didn't win, and they all lost.
Peter Burns opened the studio show right after that Arkansas game because it was the closer of the night on the SEC network. And I think he started by saying that this is maybe the craziest just single midweek, especially day that he's seen in however many years of watching SEC basketball. But it really was one of those days that you're just like, holy cow, just kind of hang on tight, see where you end up landing by the end of the night. And it was it was a ton of fun to watch in SEC basketball.
Dude, SEC hoops this year. I know you guys probably haven't seen anything like this. Like, it's just when you have a team like Arkansas, who's coached by Coach Cal until last night, being winless in league play after 5 games. That's how you know. That's how you know it's just unbelievable.
My favorite Cal quote, because they've got him on the Peter Burns SEC network interview right after the game, and my favorite quote that he has, just he went on a long rambling tangent, if you will, and he said, "Look, we're not great. We're pretty good. We're not great. We're pretty good. I just told the guys, you gotta be having more fun than everybody else out there on the court. If you're having more fun, good things will happen." And I thought those 2 quotes back to back were just phenomenal. Peak Coach Cal, especially at Arkansas. What a ride they're having over there in Fayetteville.
I was not really listening to that, but I was still watching it when he was on SEC Network, and I was on FaceTime with my brother, and one of our friends, guy was a Mississippi State fan, so he FaceTimed us after Ole Miss choked that game away, and so we were watching into the Georgia game, and my brother made a great quote, I thought. He said, John Calipari looks like a televangelist up there talking to people, just peddling crap. Just peddling crap.
That is.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. But what a day. What a day.
Hey, Coach Cal, coming soon to a streaming service near you. Omaha Productions produced documentary on this season.
That's right. Which is tough.
Is that with Vice? Isn't that right?
I have nothing to do with it. It's all my coworkers, but still, check it out. They were in Knoxville the other week. We solved that mystery.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
But what do you guys say we shift gears and get into some Tennessee stuff, some Tennessee football stuff?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, obviously, in the middle of January right now, so not too many stories going around. Ryan and I hit a couple of those big ones last week with Jermon McCoy's injury and things along those lines. But Jack, I know you got a couple topics for us to talk about here today. A couple little news bits is, hey, by the way, did you guys see that Tennessee's Twitter account posted a couple pictures of the guys just starting to kind of get back into rhythm or get back into some of these workouts, as I guess classes are back in session on campus in Knoxville. So you got the guys back in the program. So Tennessee's social media account posted a couple pictures of some of the guys working out for the first time, obviously getting ready for training camp. I saw a lot of people excited about that in the comments. So good time to have a couple of stories to go with.
Time for those putting in the work captions with the italicization and the bold and the emojis.
Everyone's doing it.
And the hype and like the endless months of hype we'll have until late August, early September. But yeah, let's get into it. 4 days ago, Tennessee picked up a pretty significant transfer portal addition. It hasn't been a very newsy cycle for Tennessee in the portal, but arguably the biggest land out of the portal so far in running back Star Thomas out of Duke. He's bounced around a little bit. Used to play at New Mexico State with Vandy quarterback Diego Pavia. After one season at Duke, transfers out to Tennessee, had 871 yards on 213 carries. It was his best season of his collegiate career so far. Also with 7 touchdowns for the Blue Devils. And this is a guy who can also catch some passes, not a ton, but he does, catch passes from time to time. Had 20 last year. So Ryan, I'll start with you. We talked about how Tennessee needed to add a running back to help replace Dylan Sampson. And now it seems like Tennessee will have, kind of a 3-headed backfield here with Peyton Lewis, Deshaun Bishop, and Star Thomas.
I think it's exactly what, you're kind of looking for if you're Tennessee, or at least the way we outlined it, that it didn't feel like Tennessee needed to go break the bank in the portal or spend a ton on a running back or get some stud, some guy that could, just be a number one. But it did kind of feel like they needed a body, just because of the standpoint. They really only had two guys back, not even proven guys. Both of them relatively proven, and Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis. And if you could have said, all right, Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis are going to stay healthy for the entire season, you're probably like, all right, you're good with those 2 guys. You don't need anybody else. But Deshaun Bishop's had some injury issues. Really, they struggled to stay healthy in his 2 years at Tennessee. Obviously, he tore his ACL his freshman year, so it's hard to, really knock him for that. It's not like he wasn't durable. He just had a freak type injury. And even Peyton Lewis was a little bit banged up this year. So when you talk about after those 2 guys, it being like DeJuan Morris, a true freshman, being your next running back on the depth chart, it did feel like they needed somebody else. And I think they probably did about as well as they could have hoped for there. And a guy that proved it in the ACC on a pretty solid Duke team last year, had good numbers. It felt like they threaded the needle of proven player who has played at a high level and shown that he's pretty good without being an absolute stud you have to break the bank for. To me, it felt like they threaded that needle really well, and because of that, I think it's a really good get. And how he fits in and how he fits with the offense and how the skills between him and Bishop and Lewis compare and contrast, I think it's all, to me, a little to be seen. But it's hard not to think that this was a good pickup at a position of need for the Vols.
Yeah, look, I'm with Ryan. I like what Tennessee was able to do here with Star Thomas and picking him up and adding him into that backfield. We know at times that Josh Heupel has liked to use a 3-headed monster in the backfield if he has it. Now, it's not obviously always worked out that way, especially last year when you had Dylan Sampson, who was so good and he was so talented and so much of Tennessee's offense ran through him. But you can look at other times in the 4 years that Josh Heupel has spent here at Tennessee where, he has used that 3-man room a little bit more if he has the ability to do so. I think that's exactly what Star Thomas brings again in that career: 2,049 rushing yards, 504 receiving yards, 22 all-purpose touchdowns. I believe he may have even taken a couple of kicks last year. Now, I don't think that's a need for him to do for Tennessee here, but one other added element to his game. One thing that I do like about what he brings Tennessee, and one thing that kind of jumped out to me from watching the highlights, is I like that he's got an ability to catch it out of the backfield. I know that's not always that's not always a guarantee. I know that he's not necessarily maybe the most proven pass catcher out of the backfield, and I think the numbers sort of back that up a little bit, but he's got that ability. He's got that dynamic ability. I'm excited to see what Tennessee could potentially do with him there. We saw plenty of times where Nico, like to use kind of the check down, like to use a swing pass, get it out quickly if he saw pressure coming up the middle. And I think that Star Thomas can do well in that role. So I think he's a very versatile player. I'm excited to see what he can do. Obviously, no negatives yet. We'll see what happens kind of as training camp develops in the spring, as they work in a fall camp. But I like this player that Tennessee picked up a lot. And he's got a football player's look to him, right? I know that it might not be the most important thing, when it comes to statistics or things like that, but I think it matters. He's got a football guy's look to him. And
We're not selling jeans here, Rick.
I know, but I think that's an important thing. When you look at a player, you got to say, does that look like a football kind of guy? He looks like a football kind of guy. So I think that's an extra check mark in his direction.
Fully just become the scene from Moneyball.
No, well, maybe.
I'm looking for Fabio here.
Yeah.
So
who's
6'10"
Fabio?
or 6'2", 210. That Like, does that what makes him look like a football guy? Just
I can't
his size?
explain it. I can't explain it. It's just one of those things. When you see it, you know it. And I think that he's one of those guys that has a football look, especially as a running back, right? You need a little bit of swagger and you need a little bit of juice in that position. And again, this isn't. I saved this point to the end for a reason, right? It wasn't my leadoff
Strongest.
point or anything. I'm just saying, I think he's got a good football look. I think it's important to have a football look on the field.
Hey, man. Yeah, sure. What really sticks out in Star Thomas's last season is a 3-game stretch in which he just flat out dominated in September against UConn, 22 for 122. MTSU had over 102 touched. And then the UNC game, which was his biggest game of the season, 30 carries, 166 yards, and a touchdown, along with 2 catches for 45 yards and a score. I point out this game because he can handle a 30 carry workload, which you obviously saw was necessary sometimes for Tennessee last season with Sampson. I don't think it'll be necessary this year, as we've already discussed that Tennessee's going to have a more multi-back approach. But if needed, if there's injuries that occur, Star Thomas is obviously a guy who can handle a significant workload in a single game like he did last year. So I think that is a plus.
For sure. And if I'm not mistaken, that was a game that I want to say Duke was down like 20-0 and came back and won 21-20. So big comeback win. One of the plays I think most people, or has most been shown on social media since he committed, was he had like a 30-yard touchdown catch on the kind of a swing pass out in the flat and made some guys miss in that game. So that was definitely his best game. And you said it. I mean, he had his first 2 years at New Mexico State, he had sizable roles, but he went from 108 carries his freshman year, 112 carries his sophomore year, to 213 last year. So he had a lot of carries throughout the season, and certainly a 30 carry game and 30 plus touch game against North Carolina was his biggest, and a game where they really leaned on him in a comeback effort.
Yeah, and Rick, this is a good get for Tennessee, but I don't think any of us would be surprised if I said, hey, Lewis, Bishops, Thomas, they all stay relatively healthy next season. You wouldn't be surprised if I told you that any of them led Tennessee in rushing. Like, it is a true kind of who knows is going to be the best. They could all be very similar with this backfield as we sit right now.
Yeah, I think we could sit here and we could talk about our likely expectations for who may lead that room. But if you're talking about a situation where, yes, somebody gets a couple extra carries based on somebody being banged up for maybe a small stretch during the season next year, then I think it could probably go in any direction. Again, Deshaun Bishop is probably my favorite in the room to be in that category. But look, I think you go back to last year when Deshaun Bishop did get hurt, Tennessee turned to Peyton Lewis, who at the time was a true freshman. I think that told us that, hey, Tennessee's got a lot of stock in that guy. And I think they've got a lot of belief in what he can do at the running back position, especially Darrell Sims coming in during his first year last season. I think that matters. So, I think that those guys are going to have good opportunities to show what they can do during training camp, during the spring and the fall, as Tennessee works their way into the season. But I think maybe after a couple of games, we'll kind of have more of an idea about what that hierarchy or what that, pecking order is going to look like. But as things stand right now, based on the normal ebbs and flows of the season, I have my favorite with Deshaun Bishop. But I think any of those guys could, maybe burst out onto the scene, become Tennessee's go-to guy for a little while. But I like what each one of them can do, and I like what each one of them brings to the table.
Every single year, even though Tennessee's kind of had a three-headed, running back room, either one guy has separated himself at the top or one guy has kind of separated himself at the bottom as the third guy. And to your point, Jack, like I really could see that being it. Like I have no sort of feel who that would be on the top end, I would imagine probably more likely the bottom end, but hey, maybe somebody breaks out and has a big season. So I'm really curious as to what that will look like, and will definitely be something worth noting as we get into spring practice and fall practice and closer and closer to the season.
Absolutely. All right, let's shift gears a little bit to some off-season treetop stuff that doesn't really matter right now, but it is fun to talk about, and that's national championship odds. Now, Tennessee not going to be at the top of these lists. Of course, Ohio State's there, Texas is there, but Tennessee was in the top 10, according to FanDuel Sportsbook. You can check the article out on RockTopInsider.com. It was written a couple of days ago. but Tennessee listed at plus 1,800, eighth best odds to win the national championship and fourth best in the SEC behind Texas, Georgia, and Alabama. So you're going to be looking at Tennessee is definitely a top 5 SEC team going into next year, arguably top 10 team in the nation, Ryan. And, it feels like this is about right.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it was interesting to see that just the over/under win totals too. Tennessee was at 9.5, which was really third. I think it was Sports Bet Online that had that, I want to say. So yeah, kind of right in that mix. And you saw it too with the way too early college football rankings, where it's pretty clear some order Georgia and Texas are the top 2 teams in the SEC, and then after that, it kind of feels like a little bit of a logjam in dealer's choice. But yeah, Tennessee's in the mix of that. And I think the thing that does make sense is to where like Alabama was ahead of Tennessee in the national championship odds, but behind them in the win totals. I think it's 2 things. I think one, probably just still the public perception and belief in Alabama to go win a national championship compared to Tennessee, which makes sense. And 2, the schedule aspect of it, to where Alabama is going to have a more difficult schedule, so maybe more likely that they go 9-3 as opposed to Tennessee, or they go 8-4, and they're not quite as good. But on the other side of things, if things click, they have more talent on the roster. The star rating, the blue chip ratio is going to be higher for Alabama than Tennessee, so that maybe gives them a little bit more upside. So I didn't think anything was super surprising there, but it was interesting to see what Vegas thought, and it's interesting to see kind of the range of where Tennessee was ranked in some of these way too early stuff over the last week or so.
Yeah, I think I was asked about the win total too on radio the other day, and I believe it's the same as Georgia too at 9.5. And you can be like, "Oh, well, is viewing Tennessee is the same as Georgia." Same ballpark, yes, but you're right. The schedule is the big thing here. Tennessee does have a pretty, manageable schedule, and I would venture to say it's a little bit easier next year just because you get Georgia at home and because of how we saw Bama slip. Like, yeah, you go Bama on the road, but Alabama is not obviously the same, or at least we don't expect them to be. And you got the quarterback question mark. Get Georgia and Neyland, as I mentioned. The Gainesville trip is the one that really is the difference here between the 2 schedules, in my opinion. But Oklahoma and Arkansas come to your place. The road trips aren't that difficult, in my opinion, next year for Tennessee. And I'd honestly say it's easier next year than it was this year. And by the way, the ACC team, NC State ended up being bad, but going into it, we're going to have a lower opinion of Syracuse than we did of NC State last year.
For sure. I mean, again, I think and we talked about some on here last week, the Kyle McCord news is just huge massive for Tennessee in that game. And especially all the more massive when you consider Jermon McCoy's status is pretty up in the air. So I would agree. The thing I would say, the 2 things that I found really interesting in the over-unders, and I do believe the one I saw, at least, Georgia was 10, if not 10.5. They were a little bit above Tennessee.
That's one I saw too.
Oh, okay.
But what I found really fascinating, and only one of them really pertains to Tennessee, but both South Carolina and Florida were 6.5. And I think those 2 teams are going to be really 2 media darlings this offseason. And I think South Carolina, the quarterback situation, and South Carolina obviously had a really good season this year, went 9-3, played better and better towards the end of the season, I guess outside of the bowl game. But I do know they had a ton of seniors on that team this year, and they obviously have Birch back and Dylan Stewart, some big name defensive linemen, but they lose a lot of guys too. So I found that really interesting. Just to how Vegas views them, I think it's going to be really different. Florida didn't surprise me as much. Just because, again, the schedule is really hard, and I don't think Florida, as good as they finished the season, they still didn't have as good as a year as South Carolina did. But that's another team that I think, after the way they finished the year with the way DJ Lagway played, there's going to be a lot of buzz around Florida this year, and it was interesting to see them be lower. And again, I think that could be a good thing for Tennessee that they get that game later in the year, depending on how Florida season has played out to that point.
Yeah, guys, I think when we talk about the national championship, we just saw what it took to get there and to win it, right? There was a lot that went into that. Not only did Ohio State have to get through just a grueling gauntlet of Tennessee and Oregon and whoever else they played, and Notre Dame at the very end. But they had to, they had to get there during the regular season in the first place. So I think one of the big things for Tennessee is just, hey, what can Tennessee do to get one of those coveted home playoff spots, right? If they do want to make it to the national championship, that obviously involves a good regular season. I don't know. Jack, can anything change between now and next year's playoff? I mean, can they do that reordering this early that they've been talking about, or is that all speculation? I didn't think so. You're shaking your head no. So that raises the importance of potentially getting one of those home spots, right? Which, as we saw this year in that first 12-team playoff, is extremely important. Tennessee, and this comes from Michael Bratton on Twitter, SEC Mike, as many are familiar with, the combined 2024 records for every SEC team's 2025 schedule. I hope that made sense. That was a mouthful. Tennessee is the second team at the back. Their 2024, their 2025 opponents' records last season was 77 and 75. That's the second lowest, behind 76 and 76. That's from Missouri. So obviously, Tennessee's got a little bit of an advantageous road ahead of them. Now, obviously, that's not a one-to-one comparison or direction or correlation. There's a ton of movement. I mean, I wrote an article just about a week or two ago just about how many of the quarterbacks that Tennessee is going to see this season, how many of them are going to be different from last season. So obviously, there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of things that are different. But look, Tennessee's got an advantageous schedule. We've talked about that before. Yes, the beginning of the season against Georgia is going to be difficult. I think that game against Florida at the very end of the season, I know we disagreed on the phrasing of this maybe a couple months ago when the schedule came out, but to me, that is a trap game. That's a challenging game at the very least in Gainesville at the end of the season, but you got to handle business during that middle stretch if you want to put yourself in a good playoff position. So I'm less about the odds. I don't gamble too much, right? It's just not in my nature. So the odds are harder for me to wrap my head around. But what I do know is what I just saw the path was to get to the national championship and to win the national championship. And that was difficult. That was a long road and a long grind. I think that getting one of those home playoff spots is one of the most important things you can do to put yourself in a position for that later on. So how does Tennessee go through the regular season? Obviously, that's what we're going to be breaking down for the next couple months.
Yeah, it's easy to say being seeded 5 through 8 is the sweet spot, given what we saw this past season with all 4 of them winning 2 games, and 2 of them winning 2, 2 of them winning 3, 1, 4, obviously. But yeah, it's going to be important, and we'll see how conference championship games are devalued as the years progress. I actually think that fast forward 5 years, conference championship games won't exist anymore. I think they will go away, and the season will be a week shorter, which will benefit a lot of things. We'll see if the playoff expands and stuff like that. But yeah, 5 through 8 feels like the sweet spot right now. Of course, easy to say with what just happened, but and the money that programs get from hosting a playoff game too is just obviously so absurd. So from that standpoint, you're going to want it as well.
For sure. I don't think that would be surprising at all to see them get rid of that. And it's been interesting to see some of the numbers. And, obviously the national championship game did not do great from a TV rating standpoint. And why that is, I think, is very interesting. Not that I have the answer or anything, but 2 big brands would not have expected it to be a dip compared to the last year's game.
People are saying it's because it's in the NFL playoffs. Obviously, it wasn't going up against any games, but maybe just because of when it is. I don't really know. I think it's just because the season lasted too long. I think people just kind of checked out.
Yeah.
Like, think about how long ago Tennessee lost to Ohio State in Columbus. And Ohio State just won
forever ago.
Yeah. I mean, think about when Tennessee went into Nashville and beat Vanderbilt. That's the end of the season. Not really. That's like halfway through the season now. I mean, that was
59 days later was the national championship game after that day.
After the end of the regular season or after the day that Tennessee lost to Ohio State?
No,
the regular season.
After rivalry Saturday.
That's what I thought. I wanted to clarify, but I mean, you're right. I had a buddy who basically consistently texted me during every round of the college football playoffs, and they were like, man, this thing is still going on. I was like, yeah, we're in the Final Four next week. Man, this thing is still going on. Like, I do think that there is an adjustment period that people are now going to be used to moving forward. But I do think there was a good amount of people who this year were just like, whoa, this feels like a lot of college football right now, like way more than we're used to. Maybe even got burnt out a little bit towards the end. And then I do think that there is a little bit of an SEC, factor. I think without there being an SEC team,
Yeah.
there is going to be chunks of people who are just not going to be as interested naturally. I hate to admit it, but I am kind of one of those people. I watched the whole game. I was interested in the whole game, but I think I would have had a little bit more juice going into it if it was one of the teams that at least I was familiar with a lot more heading into that championship game. So I think that might have played a little bit of a role too.
Yeah, and a little something behind the curtain here. This is like no secret. You can see it by who's on TV and
Yeah,
SEC
spill the
Network
beans, Jack.
programming
Spill the
being
secrets.
nothing revolving the Natty. But the last 2 years, it's funny. Like when I'm around, my show and stuff at the national championship in LA, everybody was there. Like everybody, all the SEC Network people, and also ESPN sending just so many more people. Like everybody and their mother who covers college football on any level was at the national championship, doing TV, doing stuff, all the stuff. Last year, little less, or actually a lot less, but still there was, quite a few people there. This year, dude, there was hardly anybody. I'm talking from a talent perspective, not a fan perspective. Like ESPN specifically really keeps it close with who they send. They're sending less than 10 talent, like 10 people. I mean, they're having Boog, Galloway, McElroy, Stanford Steve, like do all these shows. And, because there's no SEC team, it's not like ESPN's the SEC network, but obviously there's an affiliation there. Everybody knows that. So you're right. Like when there's not an SEC team, I think it just kind of affects everything a little bit and everybody looks to ESPN first. And, I don't know, maybe that's a factor in it. Who knows? But I just think it's interesting that the lack of people that go to cover a national championship when there's not an SEC team.
That's why I thought that maybe
that
like
is
a
interesting.
Texas, maybe like a who would have been Texas Notre Dame or Texas Ohio State? Which one would it have been?
It would have
Texas
been
Notre Dame.
Texas Notre Dame. Yeah.
So I kind of felt like that was, I mean, it's why baseball wants Yankees Dodgers, right? It's why, maybe the NFL wants, someone in LA versus, somebody on the East Coast. It is just kind of that geographical separation thing, right? Where, hey, you got a northern team in Notre Dame, you got a southern team in Texas, and people can kind of figure that out for themselves. So sometimes I think, it's just how it worked out here. But I think that you might have had some southern fans who just kind of said, that I'm going to check out. Maybe those people don't kind of consider Texas as one of their true southern teams as well. So I definitely think that what Jack is saying as well, it all kind of factors in together.
Yep. Let's move on to some hoops talk. These guys are boots on the ground every game, covering the team. Tennessee beat Mississippi State on Tuesday night. Felt like last time. It was Tuesday night, 68-56. Dominant first half. Kind of coasted in the second half to a win. And Tennessee improves to 18-2 on the season. Still only 2 losses in league play with a 4-2 record. Ryan, any big takeaways from the Vols' home win over the 13th ranked Mississippi State Bulldogs?
I don't think there's anything too crazy. I mean, a game Tennessee needed to win, largely from the standpoint of they lost to Vanderbilt a few days before. They're going to Auburn this weekend in a game that's going to be really, really difficult to win. A game I'd be pretty surprised if they win. And then even next week, they're at home for 2 games, but they get Kentucky and Florida. So it's just a difficult game. It's crazy to say it's a top 15 game, but talking about a game that's the easiest game in a couple weeks stretch, coming off a loss. So Tennessee needed it. I think from the game itself, you saw Chaz Lanier get a little bit more back to form. He scores 23 points, hits 5 3-pointers. He'd shot the ball better at Vanderbilt, but did not play very well otherwise in that game. Had 5 turnovers, no turnovers against the Bulldogs. Very good for Tennessee to get him going. And I think from Tennessee's going to get close to their ceiling. They need Chaz Lanier to play well, and he did just that against Mississippi State. And now Tennessee needs to try to get some consistency and see if they can kind of string some good Chaz Lanier games together.
Hey, one thing that I want to mention from the game against Mississippi State, and Ryan, I'll see if maybe you had noticed this at a different point in the season, because I had not before. Tennessee, and I wrote about this yesterday, so I kind of just used the headline that I came up with. Tennessee reached into the Steph Curry bag of tricks for a specific play with their guards that I absolutely loved. And I ended up going on a YouTube rabbit hole yesterday to just kind of figure this out and see what people were saying about it, how this play works. But it's got many names. It's the do-si-do, it's the square dance, it's the slingshot, it's the floppy. There's so many different things that you can call it, but basically what it was Zakai Ziegler and Jordan Gainey, they ran directly at each other underneath the basket along the baseline. Basically, once they got into the paint, they linked arms, sort of orbited around each other. So they ended up slingshotting each other back in the direction that they were coming from. It was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. They were legitimately locked arms like it was a square dance. We had a lot of people saying on Twitter, hey, that's not just a gimmick. One, it creates trouble for the defender because he can't split the two players and foul them. Obviously, they're kind of linked right there. But on the other hand, you can get a guy off of a pick right there. Now, Jordan Gainey basically did the do-si-do. He came back off. He came off of a Milicic screen, and he got a really good look behind the arc from the three-point line. Did not go in, but he got a good look off of it. You actually can go back to like 2015. Klay Thompson and Steph Curry were doing that for the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry is still doing it today with those guys in Golden State. I just thought that was an interesting little wrinkle, that it's a play that you don't see very often. It's certainly one of those plays that can easily go viral on social media, but it's something that you've seen NBA greats like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson do to get their shooters open. I thought it was really fascinating that you saw Tennessee do that yesterday. Again, it was just one singular play, but it was at least something I hadn't seen Tennessee do yet or do previously this year. I don't know if you guys had, and maybe I just missed it, but I thought that was a really fun little moment of yesterday's game. And again, sent me on the game 2 days ago. And again, sent me on a pretty good rabbit hole, just kind of looking that up and figuring out what the schematics of that play was. Ryan, had you seen it before from this Tennessee team?
I can't remember this year specifically. I remember a handful of times where they did it last year
Okay.
with Dalton Connect. Yeah, I mean, floppy is like the general action there, and it's a little bit different. Typically, you have one guy under the basket and then screens on both sides for him to run off of. One being a stagger screen, but this time with two people. And yeah, I mean, Tennessee just runs floppy sets all the time, and so that kind of teams are obviously cheat that a lot to try to get over the screen and not let a shooter get open, and that essentially the do-si-do or whatever you want to call it. Just some eye candy, some misdirection to try to get one of them loose on one side and be able to have a little bit more space to set that screen and get a shooter open. So
yeah,
I can't remember it seeing it a ton this season, that specific thing, but I do know there was a handful of times last year where they did it.
We need more of that. We need more of that in college. It's such a cool looking play. It looks so ridiculous. It looks like it should not be out there on a basketball court, but it works for one of the greatest shooters of all time. It's obviously worked for Dalton Connect a little bit last year. So I like to see Tennessee bring out a little bit of innovative things like that. But against Mississippi State, I just thought you saw a Tennessee team that really wanted to come out and make a statement. And I thought you got that statement defensively early and often. Obviously, Tennessee was able to build up that lead, 16 points for the Bulldogs in the first half. Now, Mississippi State did score 15 in the first 5 minutes of the second half. But man, Tennessee was able to, keep Mississippi State at arm's length because of that lead that they built up in the first 10 or so minutes of the game. Again, really liked what Tennessee was able to do to come out and say, look, we know that we've had a couple of losses recently, 2 in the last 4 games. We know that Mississippi State is a really talented team. We want to come out here and make a statement. Not only did Chaz Lanier do that with the shooting, but Tennessee did that defensively overall as well. So I like what Tennessee was able to put together to make that work.
And, the element of Tennessee's defense was in large part the reason they lost that Vanderbilt game. That's rarely the case. And then in 2 losses last year, I mean, they got manhandled. I think that was Rick Barnes' exact word, against Mississippi State physically. So I think it was kind of a double response in some way with defense and physicality that they brought, and was certainly a really big point of emphasis going into the game. And, I saw another solid performance from Felix Okpara, who continues to stack them, 9 points, 12 rebounds, season high 12 rebounds. Funny enough, I would say probably behind Zakai, he's been Tennessee's most consistent player in SEC play, which is funny to say because he was not very consistent in non-conference play, and kind of especially struggled against some of the better teams Tennessee played. But I wrote about it yesterday some in 13 non-conference games, Akbar averaged 6.8 points, 6 rebounds, 1.8 blocks. Now in 6 SEC games, he's averaging 9.7.2 rebounds, 2.3 blocks. So nothing just insane, but more what I expected his numbers would look like this season. And we're talking about a guy that's not the highest ceiling for Tennessee. He's not going to be just a game changer or some huge offensive threat, but you've seen him be better on the glass. You've seen him be a big difference maker defensively, which is more of what I expected. And kind of to that point, in non-conference play, he had 3 games with 3+ blocks. Now in 6 SEC games, he has 4 games with 3+ blocks. So his Akbar on the defensive end has just been a lot more consistent of a difference maker, and then been a little bit better too on the glass, and a little bit better too, finishing some stuff around the rim. So that's been really big for Tennessee, and I think so one of the more positive developments they've had through the first 3 weeks of SEC play.
All right. Tennessee heads to Auburn this weekend to take on the top-ranked Tigers. You guys going to go? I assume at least one will. Both of them?
Yeah.
We'll both be there.
We'll both be there.
RTI will have boots on the ground double time down there in Auburn. A couple of notes before we get out of here, though. Circling back to football, just announced by Tennessee football. Orange and white game, April 12th. Of course, in Neyland Stadium, but April 12th is the date for the orange and white game. So that's, just a little under 3 months away. And of course, Vol Nation, I'm sure will show up for that. And then Ryan, I'm going to toss it to you for a note on Notre Dame offensive line transfer Sam Pendleton and the report that he is going to be visiting Tennessee.
Yeah, Austin Price of VolQuest had it, I think, late Wednesday night that he's visiting Tennessee. I think maybe it's even today or sometime in the back half of this week. So Tennessee has swung and missed for a handful of offensive guard transfers. The kid from Northwestern, the Thompson kid who went to LSU, the kid from USC, I can't remember what his name is. He went to Oregon. Both those guys had visited before going elsewhere. And now Pendleton, who was a redshirt freshman this past year. He started, I think, the first 5 or 6 games for Notre Dame, and then Notre Dame had someone come back from injury. And I think they kind of reshuffled the deck at offensive line, moved the right guard over to left guard. So a guy that was not a full-time starter for Notre Dame this past season, was not starting in the college football playoff or anything like that, but does have some real game experience, kid from North Carolina in the 2023 recruiting class. So someone that'll have probably, has a handful of years to play would make a lot of sense for Tennessee. And, to me, the question mark there is there hasn't been any Andre Carrick news about his waiver, but can Tennessee, the way they continue to recruit left guard, that spot in the portal, doesn't detect a ton of optimism there. So seems like probably a spot of need unless some good news happens in Carrick's front. And one, Tennessee, would be a good get for Tennessee. Not their first choice or not their first option, but somebody that has some experience and somebody that has multiple years of eligibility. And as Tennessee tries to end this just revolving door of transfer portal needs at offensive line because they seemingly can't recruit and develop anybody at that spot, somebody that can be there multiple years, I think would be a big plus.
Yeah, and then one just quick recruiting note from not the transfer portal side of things, but the recruiting trail side of things. Tennessee landed a prediction from On3 Sports VP of Recruiting Steve Wiltfong yesterday to land 4-star linebacker Braden Rouse out of the 2026 class. Now, obviously, you take those predictions with a grain of salt, and you kind of know what the content that's for. But what it at least tells you is that Tennessee is heading in the right direction. Now, I don't know if all the recruiting rankings on the various sites are updated, but I do know that 247 Sports has him currently as number 4 linebacker in the class, a top 70 player overall. So it does look like Tennessee might be trending towards one of the top linebackers in the class. This is a guy who's really exploded on the scene as of late. I wrote about it yesterday. I don't have all the teams in front of me, but since the start of 2025, which again was only, 23 days ago, he's racked up some serious offers. Georgia, Alabama, Florida State, Auburn, some Michigan, some really impressive programs. Tennessee was in on this guy early, though. Tennessee's now been able to have him on campus 3 times, 2 for football games in the fall, Florida and UTEP, and then another one during a December practice before the Ohio State game in December. So looks like Tennessee is certainly trying to do everything they can to land one of the top linebackers in the class. Again, we'll see how those recruiting rankings and whatnot shake out. But Tennessee does land a prediction. You can take it with a grain of salt. but it at least tells me that Tennessee is tracking in the right direction for a top-end linebacker. And if you look at who they signed in the 2025 class, they pulled some pretty big names. Jalen Perlotti, Christian Gass. There was another one.
Jaden
Harmon, yes. And then Brandon Ames, a 3-star player. So they were able to sign a trio of talented 4-star linebackers. Could be on the way to getting another 4-star player, somewhat linked towards the program as well. So stay tuned to Rocky Top Insider for just, whatever little kind of recruiting bits and notes are floating around there right now.
Absolutely. RockyTopInsider.com, your one-stop digital destination for all Tennessee athletic coverage, whether that's football offseason, basketball season, and baseball preseason, which, Ryan, the winter workouts, if you will, winter practices, they're getting underway.
They are, yeah. So it'll be nice, not great weather for them as they get started, but probably still, I'd wager better weather than their opening weekend opponent Hofstra's probably having up in New York. So, yeah, it's getting closer and closer. You said it at the jump, 22 days. Tennessee's starting to get things going. So it'll be here before too long, and we'll have plenty of coverage leading up to first pitch and obviously throughout the course of the season.
Absolutely. That'll do it for this edition of the Rock Top Insider Press Pass podcast. If you want to follow Ryan, you can do that at rshump00. That's SCHUMP. You can follow Rick at Ric Butler. Of course, follow Rock Top Insider at Rock Top Insider. And if you want to follow me, that's at Jack Foster Media. Before Ryan and Rick, I'm Jack. We'll see you next time.